If a perceiver, an interpreter, cannot perceive, compare, categorize, evaluate, and choose among different composite and salience patterns, it cannot drive their evolution, right? Because it cannot see the difference, right? So I'm thinking now about something very specific, about signaling. And I'm saying that a certain type of capacity, of cognitive capacity, that is constituting, according to me, basic consciousness, is leading to patterns of evolution that would otherwise not exist. Now, in all these cases, there is no assumption about mental or rational driving processes. Complexification, according to these ideas, is inevitable. Let's think about mental causation. Do we really need to think about it in animals? I mean, okay, let's say that there is something like called mental causation. Does it make a difference to evolution? I'm not talking about us. Obviously, we're making a big difference to evolution. Look at what we're doing to the world, right? Massive extinctions and stuff like that. But what about other animals? Does it make a difference that the many animals seem to be conscious? And there is today wide agreement about that. A lot of people think that many animals are conscious. Think about your dog, your cat. They feel, they have desires, they do things because they want to do something. Does this wanting have anything to do with evolution? Do we need it? Now, this question was asked in the 1950s by one of the great ethologists of the 20th century, Nico Tinbergen. And he said, no, we don't need mental causation. And the reason we don't need it is because we don't know how to think about it. We don't know how to think about consciousness. And therefore, leave it. Just leave it. It's enough to think about what he called the mechanistic cause, what is the mechanism, how things develop over time. For example, how the fertilized egg of a cat gives rise to a little kitten. The functional cause of behavior, he was thinking about behavior because he was an ethologist. You know, what is it good for now? And the evolutionary cause of the behavior, which can be very different from the current cause, current functional cause. And he said that's enough. He knew that mental causation can exist. Yes, I mean, after all, he was looking at animals and he understood animals. And he said the ethologist does not want to deny the possible existence, that was in a footnote, existence of subjective phenomena in animals. He claims it is futile to present them as causes since they cannot be observed by scientific methods. That was said in 1951. We are 75 years later today. And today there's something called consciousness studies, which includes thinking also about animals, not only about humans. There are evolutionary approaches to the question of consciousness. How did it evolve? When did it evolve? And so on. So that's, again, we're going back to the question. That was the quote attributed to Denetis. How do we go from doing things for a reason, for having reasons for doing things, right? It's a very beautiful thing. And I tell you that we cannot go straight from this to that because the gap is too great between the teleonomic and human teleology. We have to go through intermediate steps, the wanting step, the one that exists in animals. And now we can ask, does it make a difference? Does the fact that animals do things because they want something make any difference to what we see in evolution? Okay. So to answer this question, we have to think about consciousness. And when we think about consciousness, and here I'm making a very big jump because I'm not going to give you all the arguments that can sort of give good reasons for what I'm saying here. But what me and my colleagues think is that biological consciousness. I'm not talking about AI. I'm not talking about robots. I'm talking about animals. Biological consciousness, we argue, requires complex cognition. that includes working memory, the ability to remember things over time, right? Integration and differentiation of complex sensory stimuli. We see things both as wholes and parts. And we represent things. We see things as something. I see you as human beings. And memory and the flexible evaluation of complex novel compositions, so that I evaluate something according to context all the time, and I can change flexibly these things. We argue that this kind of cognition, when in animals, constitutes consciousness. It constitutes it. It is not something that is just a marker. It is constitutive of it in the same way that the cells of my liver constitute my liver. My liver is not a byproduct of the cells. Okay. Now, we argued that in biological organisms, a particular type of learning architecture which enables open-ended, generative, representational, and recursive associative learning constitutes this consciousness. It's a very particular type of learning that we require. And this learning enables us to discriminate between very different multimodal complex stimuli, to also act in complex goal-directed ways towards all kinds of goals that satisfy the needs of the organism. And they are represented in some ways in the brain. And we argued that this kind of architecture allows perceptions and feelings. We call it UAL, unlimited associative learning. Now, what I want to say now is, without going much into this, if this is correct, then what does it give us? Because I cannot talk about about the advantages of the phenomenology itself, but I can talk about the cognitive aspects and what they give to and what they create in the world. If an animal has this kind of learning capacity, then I argue the perceptions and desires of this of organisms that have this learning capacities lead to choices in the world that drive the evolution of big diversity of perceptual and motor signaling patterns. And I'm arguing that if an interpreter that receives a complex signal cannot, sorry, I will do it in the negative. If a perceiver, an interpreter, cannot perceive, compare, categorize, evaluate, and choose among different composite and salience patterns, it cannot drive their evolution, right? Because it cannot see the difference, right? So I'm thinking now about something very specific, about signaling. And I'm saying that a certain type of capacity, of cognitive capacity, that is constituting, according to me, basic consciousness, is leading to patterns of evolution that would otherwise not exist. And let me show you some examples. Here is one. There is this bird, and it's looking at these leaves. And on these leaves, if you look well, you can discern some caterpillars and even a butterfly. Now, it's not easy to see. How did these patterns evolve? They couldn't have evolved if the bird was unable to discriminate between patterns, between similar patterns, quite subtly do it, right? So this ability of discrimination is vital for the kind of argument that I'm having. This is one example. Another example is this one, sexual selection. Before we're talking about predator-prey interactions. Here's sexual selection. This female is scrutinizing the male. It's very beautiful. Why is it so beautiful? Attaining, let's say, a desired goal, a good mate, which is really symmetrical and beautiful and have all kinds of great qualities that are also indicators of fitness, would just, this thing could not exist if females were not able to discriminate between different males and to choose the one that is more interesting and more colorful and has more interesting patterns. It just wouldn't happen. So we need this kind of cognitive capacities. And here is an example of, well, here is a dragonfly. And the dragonfly goes to these flowers and pollinates them. Now, this is a flower pollinated only by wind. It has no color, it has no taste. It's very, very simple flower because the wind has no consciousness and cannot discriminate and no cognition. This one does. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a new category of selection we have to think about. When Darwin was writing his great book, he was talking about natural selection, he was talking about sexual selection, and he was talking about artificial selection. In sexual selection, he hid a little bit an aspect of mental choice, because he did say in his book on sexual, on the evolution on sexual selection and the descent of man, he did say that this kind of capacity, that the female has all kinds of mental capacities. She chooses the males because of their beauty, because of all kinds of things. And this was supposed to be, well, you know, it's a sleight of hand. It's not serious. We can't take it really seriously, right? But maybe we should. And it's a very important, I think it's an as important category as artificial selection, because without it, it introduces new values, the wishes of organisms, the kind of things that they want, which they wouldn't want otherwise, if they didn't have the kind of cognition that they do have, and felt needs. And this became the goals of their behavior. And the patterns that we see in the world, the complex patterns that we see, signaling patterns that we see in the world, would not exist if this cognition was not in place. And we argue that this cognition is constitutive of minimal consciousness. Okay, so is it teleology? Well, depends how you want to define it. It is certainly something that is based on desire. It is not something that is completely blind in some sense. It doesn't require rational kind of design. That is something that is very specific to humans. But it is something between the classical teleonomic kind of goal-directedness and the extrinsic, human-specific goal-directedness that we have. And here I was trying to give you a kind of table that was trying to look at different aspects of living organisms that are just living, but don't have this kind of, that are not conscious. Creatures that do have subjective experiencing, and symbol-based reflective creatures like us. And there are differences, very interesting differences, but also commonalities among them.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.